Hello and welcome everyone, we Weeb online and today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Naruto Became a Storm God Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Naruto has always had a voice within his head, hidden behind his thoughts. It doesn't say much, and when it does, Naruto almost never understands it, so it's easy to ignore when he's young. He simply ignores the looks people direct at him while running and playing. Close enough to count even though not quite simple. He is a child who lived in an orphanage before moving out on his own. If he is any better than other kids at doing chores, keeping the house clean, and other such tasks, he puts it down to practice when he stops to think about it. But because those dreams are so wonderful, he doesn't bother to block them out or suppress them when they appear to him in dreams more often than when he is awake. A city on a sea island is surrounded by azure waters and a brilliant summer sun. A city covered in white, red, and brilliant gold that was constructed on terraces that rose up into the surrounding hills from the ocean's edge. Most evenings, he has a dream in which he is there, even though it feels achingly, horribly familiar and filled with sorrow. He dreams of wandering the streets, running them with other kids his age, dodging groups of shinobi wearing a symbol he doesn't know, and darting past throngs of civilians. The kids run, and he follows them, leading them most of the time. The kids surrounding him have red or blonde hair, or even hair colors that aren't typical in Konoha. These people smile as well. That has never, ever occurred in Konoha. They smile and giggle at Naruto, twirl his hair, and say hello, without doubt or worry. Naruto discovers himself grinning in return, joining in on their waves and laughter with his own. From the minute the sun rises until the moment it sets, he runs and plays with the other kids, his pals, and that's never occurred in Konoha either, before returning to a sizable, elegant structure that protrudes from its surroundings like a palace. They eat around a huge table that is laden with food along with other kids, some of whom are his buddies and some of whom are just acquaintances. Naruto believes that this is an orphanage as he sees men and women in bright uniforms watching, laughing, and playing with the children. However, this orphanage is very different from the one he is familiar with. It is brighter, cleaner, and happier, and shinobi serve as the caregivers rather than regular people. As a result, Naruto has dreams of having fun, making friends, and falling in love with people who fill up his heart and become even more precious than air. He then awakens to an empty apartment that is too big for just him. Icy looks, blank glances, and ominous whispers when he turns his back, as well as kids who shun him and parents who shoo their family away. It hurts. Naruto does not believe that this is the kind of thing that can be easily fixed with a bandage because it stings, wrenches, and hurts. But despite this, he grins and runs, bringing his vivid and lovely visions into the gloomy light of reality. He acts as though he has pals, plays practical jokes, runs, and tries not to pay attention to a voice that beats in his brain and mutters, go home, and I'll find happiness." Real loneliness is accompanied with colder eyes, hearts, and bodies. In his dreams, he finds happiness, kindness, and solace. Naruto occasionally questions why he even gets out of bed. However, if someone does care, that is great. Iruka-sensei is even more excellent than the academy. Even though some of them sneer, the locals don't whisper as much, and Iruka at least treats everyone equally, as long as they don't spend too much time together. Some of the kids there don't seem to be scared by him, and their parents don't seem to mind either. However, it's worse since when Naruto is listening to the teachers, the voice in his head is louder. The lectures are enough to drive him crazy because the teacher would only mention one item while the voice in his head fills in endless amounts of material to the point where Naruto's head aches and he is unable to recall anything. They snap, snarl, and yell at him for it even though it's not his fault because he's always taking their attention away and listening to the voice instead of the Chunin instructor. The voice is frequently more engaging, simpler to comprehend, and almost like remembering rather than learning. Someone shouts, chakra, and immediately Naruto's mind is filled with information about elemental affinities, cycles, various categories of strength depending on ranks, basic chakra theory, and he gets given a displeased scowl for missing the teacher's question while trying to sort it all out. When given a test on taijutsu theory, Naruto glances at the questions and instantly remembers 100 distinct forms and their corresponding katas, the best uses depending on the circumstance, the background of each sequence, and his test is basically blank when it is turned in, with a few stick figures drawn in various stances along the edges. When Sarutobi inquires, one of the more experienced professors regretfully responds, "Smart? Well read, I guess. Certainly knows more than others, but he's lazy, not dedicating himself. Minato was a genius, after all, and it's only to be expected that his son has at least a little of that." However, Naruto is still a child, still unaware of what he is, what he could be, and Sarutobi isn't about to push him. Let the boy have as much of a childhood as he's able. He's going to be a shinobi, so it will likely be shorter than most, regardless. The worst courses are those on sealing. The impulse to say it aloud is nearly overwhelming, but Naruto manages to sit through the first 3 episodes just barely. A voice in the back of his head is growling, "That's not right, that's not how it works. What are you saying, you fool?" Although he has little experience interacting with others outside of his beautiful dreams, Naruto already realizes that the teacher doesn't value his viewpoint and chooses to look away, plan pranks, and pay attention to other things. He obviously fails that unit as well. Kunai and Shuriken come naturally enough because that's straightforward. He listens to the voice, to the hours of practice he's put in both in real life and in his dreams, to the awareness of his own body that comes through training-related dream experiences. He also possesses a unique talent for Sendan, as evidenced by his almost unsettling accuracy for a boy who is almost 12, which allows him to consistently strike the target in the center. It's better that way since everyone has a different basic stance and throws slightly differently. And Iruka-sensei doesn't try to get him to alter how he does it. Iruka-sensei actually grinned at him, reached out to fluff up his hair, and said, "Good job," in such a pleasant manner that Naruto froze since he isn't used to hearing it outside of dreams. He responds with a smile that is big, happy, and contented, with the weight of his Hidaite pressing against his forehead and the aroma of the ocean filling his nose. He dashes past vibrant streets and a crowded, colorful market. One woman with scarlet hair laughs as he flashes past and waves a hand to draw him closer. His blonde hair sways about his shoulders. The tie that connects this place to the shinobi housing where he lives has been gone someplace. She exclaims, "Arashi-kun, you'll never succeed with your hair and your face like that. I tell you." Naruto, or Arashi, or perhaps both of them, stagger to a stop, then duck back and slide around her stall with its display of lovely hair accessories. He obediently replies, "Thank you, Mio-san." She is tall and attractive, has kunai calluses on her fingers, has her gorgeous hair well tied up, and clucks her tongue when she pulls him in. "Of course, Arashi-kun," she replies as she takes out a brush and rubs it through his hair, her blue eyes glistening. "Have you eaten? Are you running late today?" Mio's not his mother, is only distantly related, cousins, or at least that's what she says. Though in reality the Uzumaki clan is large enough that it's possible they're hardly related at all. But she acts like it, and Naruto, who receives the same treatment from the majority of people on the streets, has long since learned not to object. "No, Mio-san, Sihara-sensei gave us the morning off, and But when she takes up a set of hair sticks with needle-sharp tips and a string of golden bells on them, he still does. "I don't have the money for that, Mio-san, and you can't," she tenderly says, "Hush," twisting his hair into a bun and putting the decorations on. As she runs her fingertips over the bells, a gentle chime can be heard. She taps her own hair accessories as she winks at him, saying, "They're mine, so I can do whatever I want with them. And plus, they're a fantastic backup weapon for a shinobi. Don't you think?" Naruto flushes but smiles in response. Reaching up to touch the thin string of bells, he replies, "Thank you, Mio-san." It has a pleasant, gentle, and sweet sound that makes him think of her voice. He cherishes all the people in his dream world. They are all so dear to him and so close to his heart that the entire city is practically touching it. He also loves them all. Loves this place since it is so unique from the outside world. Mio puts a hand on his head while grinning at him. She responds, "Anything for our future Uzukage." And despite the humor in her voice, the words are in no way patronizing. It is the very best thing in the world for Naruto, who is used to scorn and derision anytime he discusses his objectives with anybody other than Hokage Jiji or Iruka-sensei. Since he's been sleeping in this dream world every night for as long as he can remember, the voice that yells Arashi above the commotion of the market waking up has become just as familiar to Naruto as his own. A second later, a child his age dodges 2 men carrying a crate between them and grabs hold of Naruto's arm with a smile. There is a rare dark head bobbing and weaving through the crowd at a run. "You're late, Arashi, there you are," he exclaims. "Let's go, come on." Naruto cries out, "Kagami," but his best friend laughs and yanks him away. Neo, who is watching them leave and grinning indulgently, waves back. "Kagami, how was I to know when to meet you when you didn't provide me a time to do so?" Kagami squints his sallow eyes. "Matches begin at 8, he responds. "Don't you want to see them all? And shouldn't you be able to figure out the Jounin exam's timetable as the bright student of the Nidame Uzuki's niece?" Even as he launches into a run with Kagami at his elbow, Naruto controls a smirk of his own. He then waves to two blue-haired kunoichi who are waiting at the market's western gate. They chuckle as they pass by and are followed by a white-haired man selling bread. He argues, "And shouldn't you act more respectable as the eldest son of the Uchiha clan's best diplomat and ambassador? Shouldn't you?" He then dodges a woman carrying flower baskets, makes a leaping leap, and springs up to the tiled rooftop above. The Uchiha soon follows, appearing just a little annoyed. He murmurs, "What my father doesn't know can't hurt me," but he leaves before he can complete the sentence. He can already sense energy rising and flood like the sea as Naruto strides toward the arena's southern border. They laugh as they race one another, jumping over chasms and sliding down inclination, packing as much acrobatics as they can into their leaps. 3 years have passed since Kagami first moved to the city, and he has spent each of those years as Naruto's best buddy. Of course, Naruto has other friends as well, but none of them share his competitive spirit or desire to get stronger. They are competitors, rivals, closest friends, and everything in between. Because Kagami was so very bright and full of life, and in contrast Sasuke is just dull, flat and grimly sad, it causes Naruto to reflect on the contrast between his dreams and his reality, between a shining city on the sea and Konoha amidst its forests. It also causes him to reflect on having precious people, many, and it causes him to feel regret. When the exam for graduation is held, Naruto raises his hands to construct a bunshin and immediately begins the signals for a bunshin he invented and had only this morning practiced in his dream. Only at the very last second does Naruto remember where he is, realize that perhaps that is not the ideal jutsu to employ in a confined classroom, and blunders, wind and water combined, strong when summoned and explosive when released. Disaster, he muses as he peers at the grotesque, terrible thing he has conjured. And to make matters worse, Iruka-sensei scolds him, and he fails, just like the previous 2 times he attempted the exam. Because he always defaults to his own storm clones and must correct at the last minute, or he becomes overwhelmed when he looks at the test questions, or he writes something that he is certain is correct but that contradicts what his lectures said. It's painful to see how disappointed Iruka appears. When the parents arrive to pick up their kids, they whisper in a low but not quite low enough voice that he's the only one who failed. That's good to hear, I suppose. He ought not train to be a shinobi. He is because, we are not permitted to discuss that. Pulling his goggles down, Naruto tries to focus only on their supper together the previous evening, and the awkward warmth of the stranger. Tries not to think about how much time is left till he can return home, get into bed, and dream of a different world where everyone is valuable to him. I only wish I had received my degree. Then I'll tell you a wonderful secret, Mizuki replies with a smile to him. The voice in Naruto's head warns him, don't trust. But for the first time in a very long time, he pushes it away and fully blocks it out so that he can't even make out a faint echo of it. After all, he can't continue to exist only in dreams. However, that evening, as he prepares to steal the scroll, he closes his eyes for a brief period of time and dreams of being a genin with a strange and yet familiar symbol on his Hidaite, of a Jounin sensei who smiles at him, calls him a genius, and ruffles his hair, of a girl and a boy who train with him, grow with him, and inspire him even as he does the same to them. I want that, he thinks, and then swiftly pushes the notion aside since he's long since given up on wanting absolutely impossible things. Naruto wakes up with his cheeks moist and a pounding, throbbing aching in his chest, and even though the voice is silent, the quiet is no consolation. Sometimes, albeit generally only in brief flashes or scattered periods, he dreams out of order, dreams that a grown guy with long blonde hair, pale blue robes, and 2 hair accessories with golden bells is reflecting back at you from a mirror, of a woman, her red hair pulled back in a tail, spectacles on, waving a finger at him with a look of amusement in her eyes, of years, battles, and producing jutsus that he is aware of when he awakens. Because it's just a dream, he doesn't even try to use them in class. Just a dream. But sometimes Naruto isn't so sure because he dreams of being that man and going to meetings, having people bow. smile, and murmur Sandame Uzukage Uzumaki Arashi, dreams of reading letters bearing the recently appointed Hokage's seal, signed with the name Saruto by Hiruzen. Dreams of talk of war and then actual war. Dreams of going out onto the sea like walking on dry land, each step steady even with a fleet of boats darkening them. The woman with the red ponytail throws herself at him and hugs him tightly, but Kagami pushes his way through the crowd that has gathered and punches him in the shoulder, then wraps his arms around him and pulls him close. They call him the storm god of Uzushio, and they cheer for him when he returns at an even, measured pace, stepping onto the shore. His best buddy calls him an idiot, and Naruto chuckles at him while giving him a hug and attempting to block out the screams that he heard when he destroyed the fleet. He asks in jest, "Shouldn't you not talk of the Uzukage that way as the Sandame Hokage's foremost and most trusted diplomat? You might have let Kiri to just..." Kagami snorts. "As the revered and much-loved Sandame Uzukage, shouldn't you know by now not to take ridiculous risks? Uzushio has barrier seals for a reason, doesn't it?" Naruto completes for him, and he can see the seals Kagami is referring to, which are meticulous and intricate and infused with the blood of every shinobi family in the village. "No, Uzushio isn't ready to withstand a siege, and I will not let them get that close. Not to my people," he says, meeting the Uchiha's dark eyes. Kagami releases him with a weary, long-suffering sigh and shakes his head, just rolling his eyes. "Fine," he says, "but if Kiri is making a move against Uzushio, we'll need Konoha." Naruto agrees, anticipating what his friend was going to say. "And we'll have to move quickly. Uzushio's location is good for defense, but we're also cut off from help here." Naruto nods, plans already clicking into place, courses of action and likely outcomes and strategy racing through his brain. Kagami says, putting a loose grip on Naruto's wrist, "I can be gone by dawn. 4 days to Konoha, and then 4 days back, and possibly a week in between to assemble forces and sort out the politics. You can last that long. If worst comes to worst, I'll let Kiri tire themselves out on the barrier, and then send my jounin out to clean up the mess." Naruto responds, turning his hand to lace their fingers and give them a brief, reassuring squeeze. Ukami Shunka, the jounin sub-commander from one of Uzushio's smaller clans, steps forward and says, "We'd all appreciate the chance to actually get off our asses and enjoy your leftovers. Uzukage-kun." She waves a scroll at Naruto and says, "I've got the rosters of all jounin available and fit for action. Should I start drawing up battle squads? I've heard, Shunka-san, that the other Kage genuinely earn respect from their subordinates. Isn't that a novel idea?" Naruto nods, even as he rolls his eyes at her. "We respect you, Uzukage-sama, every one of us, but we also love you, and of course that's going to make us impudent once in a while. You're like a little brother to half of our forces, and an older one to the rest of them. Get used to it." The silver-haired Kunoichi grins cheekily at him before hitting him over the head with her scroll, and sauntering off into the crowd. "I should have just been a fisherman," Naruto laments. "I'd probably receive more respect that way." He touches the lump growing on his skull. "We'd all tease you just as much, perhaps even more, because you'd be a terrible fisherman," Kagami snorts, vowing, "Never." Draping an arm across Naruto's shoulders and gently butting their heads together. "The demon fox was sealed 12 years ago. Right. You know about that, right?" But he's smiling, and despite lumber and sails and bits of cloth and the tiniest trace of crimson just beginning to drift in on the tide, Naruto smiles back. 12-year-old Naruto is merely a student, and a fairly subpar one at that, but he is intelligent. The voice, which Naruto has observed normally goes silent while dealing with issues from the previous several years, is of little assistance in this case at least. He thus pauses and keeps a wary eye on Mizuki. He now has some comfort in the shadow clone technique, and even though it still isn't as cozy as his storm clones, it is at least a safety net. He observes Mizuki grinning, sneering, and posing while his mind jumps ahead and does odds calculations. Not that he really needs one. They are great, a great Kage, even among his peers, and Naruto, genin or not, has lived 2 lives, one in the day, village prankster and pariah, and one in the night, genius and favored child for all that he's still an orphan, still a genin. The rule that states no one is permitted to discuss about how you are the Kyuubi no Kitsune is then uttered by Mizuki as she sneers happily at him and says, "The rule. For once, Naruto instinctively names the person as Mido-sama and is unsure whether it's him or Arashi. Perhaps there isn't really a distinction between them at all, only memories, including this one. He concludes that everything can be explained by Jinchuriki, everything he's ever been curious about, plus much more. All the chilly looks and glares and youngsters being dragged away by the hand, all the whispers and stares, all the little acts of cruelty that he has never been able to really comprehend. The term makes a bell-like sound in his head, reminding him of the bell that chimed across Uzushio to signal the hour. And if what he remembers of it is accurate, then perhaps everything else is accurate as well. This is because he knows the word Jinchuriki as well as he knows Mido's name and is well aware of everything it stands for and entails. That idea is breathtaking. I've never killed anyone, but I killed a whole army. What does that make me? He remembers bodies on the tide, blood staining the sea as his storm clouds built, and the ocean roared at his command. When Iruka is bleeding, hurt, and dying in front of him, Naruto can only think, this is my darling person. I owe everything to this person. I won't let you take Iruka-sensei from me either. I've already lost everyone else in that dream world because they are never around when I awaken. He gives Iruka's face one more short glance before quickly putting his feet together and running away. He will practice each and every one of the jutsus from his nightmares in the real world, no matter how many people they kill, until they are coming out of his ears, and then he won't ever be caught off guard like this again. Distance, and the chance to fight. Never, ever have to take the chance of losing one of his few priceless people. Never, not the way he did in the dreams, surrounded by fire, blood, and swords, with Naruto himself pushed back from the front, cornered, and mercilessly dispatched. Never, he repeats to himself before taking off. Iruka is pursued by Mizuki until he sees his error, and then Iruka responds, "You're correct," and Naruto froze, ice forming in his chest. The demon fox would do that, but Naruto is different. I've already recognized him as one of my greatest students. Maybe he's not the hardest worker, and he's clumsy, and no one accepts him, but he already knows what it means to experience anguish inside your heart. He isn't the demon fox, one out of an entire community seeing it, only one person acknowledging it. But is that not enough? The windmill shuriken is knocked out of Mizuki's hands and he is sent to the ground by a flying kick that Naruto has rehearsed with Kagami so many times that it is virtually muscle memory. Naruto stands over him and is staring down. He snarls, "Don't touch Iruka-sensei. I'll kill you." Even if the whisper is silent, it might be Arashi in his thoughts. Alternatively, it might be all Naruto. Or perhaps there isn't any distinction between the two at all. But as Naruto raises his hands, his body splits in half while making signs that are both unfamiliar and odd. While the real Naruto bends down and slams a hand to the ground, the clone leaps back until it is directly in front of Iruka. He yells out, "Sutin," and feels his chakra surge forward. Scattered upheaval. There is no way to avoid the cascade that surges up behind and around him before leaping towards Mizuki. Only the summoner Naruto and Iruka, who is curled up against his storm clone's back, are secure. Naruto gets to his feet and observes the damage once the cloud lifts, and the water turns back into chakra, seeps into the earth, and then disappears once again. Mizuki is lying still on the ground, and Naruto is unsure if he is still breathing at this distance. However, the other part of him, which considers priceless people and Iruka's inability to protect himself, doesn't really care. The part of him that recalls war, bodies, and blood on the tide wishes that he is. The clone extends a hand to the Chunin and inquires, "You okay, Iruka-sensei?" Iruka gently nods while blinking at it and then at its hand. He accepts it, allowing the clone to help him stand up, and then he just observes as the Bunshin grinned and gave him a sloppy salute before leaping up the nearest tree trunk and into the air. Naruto turns his face up in time to see the clone ascend beyond the treetops and explode in a gust of wind and water after feeling a ripple of chakra. If the earlier waterfall failed to capture the attention of anyone looking for him, that ought to do it. He checks on Mizuki, who is still breathing despite being somewhat battered. Just then, he winces a little because the Uzuki always utilized a rank jutsu, which would be excessive for a Chunin Academy instructor. He murmurs, "Oops," but doesn't let it stop him from crouching down and securing Mizuki's hands and ankles with his own ninja wire. When Naruto is finished, Iruka murmurs softly, "Naruto, come over here. There's something I want to offer you," as he watches him with warm black eyes. The hit I ate is a familiar weight that is somewhat damaged, skin warm, and more expensive as a result. Then, after closing his eyes, Naruto reaches up to touch it and runs his fingertips over the stylized leaf carved in the middle. He has an impression that it should be spiraling, But, no matter what, it is correct since he is always a shinobi and never has been. There is never a time when he can defend those who are dear to him the way he did tonight. Never, and especially not right now. And if it means killing someone, then be it. He won't agree with it and won't accept it unless all other options have been explored. But, he recalls soldiers stationed outside the gates, victims being killed in the streets, and blood gathering in the gutters. He also recalls his people being at the mercy of an amoral invader. Whatever it takes, they are very important to me. Much later, as they sit in Ikaraku with their ramen in front of them, Iruka says, "How did you accomplish that? How did you know that jutsu? It wasn't a kenjutsu, was it?" Although close, Naruto doesn't actually freeze. He half lies. I read it on a scroll in the library, trying to hide the break in his voice as he slurps ramen. It's kind of true. The scroll came from Sihara Personal Sensei's library, and he read it as Arashi. The prohibited scroll included a few jutsus, which I attempted, and after that, I suppose my chakra control was finally good enough, though I had never tried it before. Iruka observes him for a considerable amount of time while obviously thinking, "I've never seen anything like that before." Naruto, in regard to the clone, it doesn't matter whether it's Arashi or Naruto, he grins proudly and broadly at that. The storm clone is entirely his, and nothing similar has ever been accomplished by anybody else. I made it up, isn't that awesome? But every time you asked us to do clones in class, I kept wanting to do that one, and since it explodes, I knew it wouldn't be good. Iruka ruffles his hair, grins at him, and orders them both another round of ramen. There is no response to that. So Naruto figures the topic has been settled and Iruka's curiosity has been satiated. An entirely new type of clone, more that's than impressive for a boy of 12, and he managed in a rank jutsu without having previously attempted it. Perhaps he is his father's son after all. The Hokage muses as he puffs on his pipe, his eyes not on Iruka but on the portrait of his successor that hangs on the wall. Iruka clumsily spreads his hands and says, "I don't understand it. I've been looking back through all his work at the academy, and it's strange. There are some things, like Kanai and Shuriken and Senbon, which he's amazing at, and on some of his tests the hardest questions have the right answers, while the easy ones are left blank. I thought he was a kinesthetic learn." Naruto has apparently inherited his father's chakra control along with his mother's chakra reserves, and that is a formidable combination. There's some form of genius in there too, apparently, to be able to use in a rank jutsu after having only ever seen it in a scroll. Sarutobi closes his eyes and leans back in his chair, thinking about the situation. Of course, there is also the matter that Naruto failed his graduation exam 3 times and was only able to pass this time due to exceptional circumstances, which is confusing. It's possible that the fox's influence is showing. But considering the boy's behavior this evening and his ferocious defense of the sole teacher to acknowledge him, Sarutobi doubts it. "Iruka, you've earned it after yesterday, so please go home and rest," he says after a long pause. Instead of watching the Chunin leave, he returns his serious and slightly dejected stare to Minato's portrait. He mutters, "I wonder exactly how much of you is in that child." Minato, more than I had suspected, definitely, into the silent space. In the end, Kakashi, albeit unknowingly, is the one who gives him the theory and the evidence he needs. Sakura and Sasuke are both seeing their maybe sensei go as they are both standing in front of the memorial and gazing at the names. Naruto isn't, though. Naruto is unable to take his eyes off of the precisely engraved names and the nicely drawn lines. From one name in particular, the mere sight of which strikes the heart like a bullet. It reads Uchiha Kagami, and for an interminable, breathless moment all Naruto can see is dark hair cut at chin length. Dark eyes always carrying a spark of amusement at the world around them, a warm grin, and a pale scar on a stubborn jaw. He is also described as having warm skin. He just hears an idiot who is relieved and a happy Arashi saying, "There you are." He closes his eyes and leans back against the post he's been chained to, his mind racing. All he can feel is a kind tap on the shoulder, a tight hug, the heat of fire set against his wind and water. Inevitably, they succeed. Although Naruto didn't anticipate anything different, he doesn't stop to celebrate after succeeding in releasing himself from the ropes. Instead, he makes his way to the main library, slipping past the receptionist who has a propensity to scowl at him before making his way to the shinobi records. Both shinobi and Uchiha clan members are numerous. There aren't too many people named Kagami, and there is only one who has his name spelled in the kanji as Naruto's Kagami did. The scroll is ancient and dusty and has obviously been neglected for a long time, But Naruto crouches down in the aisle with it and attempts to clean off the grime as best he can before stooping to try to read the small, neat text in the dim light. By appointment of Sandame Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen and in service to Sandame Uzuki Uzumaki Arashi, Uchiha Kagami is the chief ambassador to Uzushio. The Second Shinobi World War had only begun when he passed away, and the scant details are more than enough to chill Naruto to the bone. Killed while trying to reach Konoha with Uzushio's request for help against Kiri, and was ambushed by Suna Shinobi. In an effort to maintain even breathing, Naruto reclines backward on his heels. Just like in his dream, an army of shinobi is approaching to conquer and destroy, with those ships on the horizon. Despite Kirigakure's might and Uzushio's strength, Whirlpool Country and the hamlet itself were both very modest. Even with allies on the mainland, they were alone, caught between the ruthless strength of Kiri and the icy indifference of Kumo. By the time anyone noticed what had happened, Uzushio had also fallen and Kagami had perished while trying to help. Naruto exhales slowly when he notices that he is holding the paper too tightly, causing the paper to crinkle beneath his fingers. He almost remembers the Mizuki and his greatest shinobi bringing down the city and utterly destroying it. He would work harder, but he is unsure of his want to recall, though. No, that, not when for so long his visions of that location have been of peace, beauty, and pleasure, but rather death and destruction and tragedy. But are they really simply dreams? Those jutsus, which he is unable to force himself to practice, have actually resulted in fatalities, haven't they? While still focusing on the name that is written on the scroll, Naruto stops before taking a deep breath and rising to his feet. 3 rows across, in alphabetical order, are the histories of the various nations. He easily locates Uzushio, several large volumes, and several scrolls, and takes the first book at random before starting to read, because he has experienced it through Arashi's eyes, whatever Arashi may be. You, that small voice says in the back of his mind. I'm you, don't you see? I always have been. He has also endured it while fighting for the Uzushio who appears in his nightmares. But he truly doesn't know anything. He notices the small details, such as how the market glows with jewel-bright hues in the afternoon sun, how the streets feel uneven under his feet, and how the birds ascend in sweeping patterns as the storm winds begin to blow. He is aware of tidbits of history, trivia, ninjutsu, taijutsu, and the fighting style used by Sihara-sensei when she used her whip and sword in tandem, but not the icy, naked facts outlined in books. Oddly enough, Naruto is currently looking for that kind of information, not the lifeblood of live beings, but rather the words of a historian seen through the prism of history. He recalls their class's study of the 5 major countries and the numerous smaller ones, but Uzushio was never brought up there or anywhere else. A sparkling metropolis by the sea or a figure known as the Storm God were never the subject of a lesson. War with Kiri or the destruction of an entire shinobi village are not mentioned. Kagami died for this, for a city lost to time, without saying or thinking anything, and Naruto can't stand that. Kagami perished. His people all perished or left, disappearing in the bustle of life in other countries as their home was so completely devastated. And that simply gives Arashi, Naruto, or both of them pain. He looks down at the book in his lap and muses, I was happy there. I was glad to see Uzushio. I adore Sakura-chan, Hokage Jiji, and Iruka-sensei, possibly Kakashi-sensei as well. I think I could even tolerate Sasuke. I'm not content here, though, am I? Not how I experienced it. Even as he stumbles up to the front desk while balancing under a 3-foot stack of books, the thought persists despite his efforts to shake it off. When he is outside in the sunlight, when the moon rises, or when he is meeting his squad for training in the morning, it doesn't go away. It floats, lingers, and remains. While observing the blonde lad bounce his way down to the bridge, Kakashi feels that Naruto is erratic. Kakashi himself is seated in a tree, trying to better understand the dynamics of the team. He recalls the test they took yesterday. The first to move quickly and the only one to confront him head-on in the open was Naruto. His use of taijutsu was unexpected, nor in the academy's typical way. Not a jumble of 20 various techniques as he would learn from merely observing other shinobi train, but strange, not at all recognizable, but obviously a unique style, clearly experienced. Naturally, it had done no good. Not a jounin, please, but for the final student in the class, it had undoubtedly exceeded Kakashi's expectations. After which, given the account of the incident with the traitor Mizuki, It was possibly a mistake to throw him into the river. That night, he summoned a Suiten jutsu that was powerful enough to render a Chunin entirely helpless, despite there being no water nearby. Just as he often did with Obaido, Kakashi had made judgments based on the loudmouthed, colorfully dressed facade, brushed that success off as a fluke, and grossly undervalued the child. And much like Obaido in his final moments, Naruto had shown how foolish that was. Tornado of water suit. Kakashi rubs the lump on the side of his head, thinking with a quiet giggle. Definitely a horrible decision. Not yet strong enough to defeat a Jounin, but it will be with practice. Time, opportunity, and practice. He already loves this team a little bit better. Sasuke has always watched Naruto. After all, they are comparable. Even with Naruto's raucous shout and clamorous cheer. Even with his unusual stumbles when Sasuke knows he's actually quite capable. Even with his occasionally peculiar, preoccupied air as though he's listening to something no one else can hear. It may be the next best thing. When they are sparring and Naruto uses a mix of water and wind that even a Chunin shouldn't have been able to manage to blast through a tree. Kakashi comments gently, "That's a powerful jutsu." Simply laughing it off, Naruto looks aside and rubs the back of his head. He grins and replies, "I saw it in a scroll," before scurrying off to adorably gush over Sakura. As Kakashi watches Naruto knock Sasuke on the behind with a taijutsu combo Sasuke has never seen before, he remarks, "That's not the typical academy style." Naruto displays an angry expression. He objects, "You didn't say we had to follow the academy style. I'm terrible at it. Kakashi-sensei, may I use yours instead?" Sasuke marvels after recalling his victories over Naruto during sparring matches in class. Wonders because there is nothing else to do. Not when Naruto can climb trees, manipulate air and water, and have his periods of stupidity cut short by flashes of brilliance. Kakashi has told them that Naruto has nearly perfect chakra control, and has vowed to teach Sasuke and Sakura at some point. But instead of gloating, Naruto looks away from them and into the distance as if he is seeing someone else entirely. After passing as a team, Naruto quits donning orange 3 days later. In its place, he dons blue. Instead of Uchiha Navy, the colors that spiral from his jumpsuit were lovingly embroidered onto every piece were indigo, sky blue, and twilight blue, along with white, black, and soft dove gray. He practices as much as Sasuke does, from dawn till dark. Sasuke will occasionally run into him when they are both heading home, both of them damaged and worn but content. Even Sasuke will admit that they are still rivals, but it's easier, simple, not right now, not when he still needs to murder his brother. But Sasuke doesn't want a friend. He can manage a rival. Sure, that's alright. Itachi will be easier to defeat if Naruto is defeated first with his weird but devastatingly swift taijutsu, mindless tenacity, and fleeting bursts of overwhelming brilliance. Not ideal, but perhaps adequate. And if occasionally, in the pitch blackness and length of his apartment's shadows, he turns over in bed till he is facing away from the window before gently, tentatively touching his lips, remembering for just a split second. No one has to know, then, despite what Tezuna the bridge builder promises them. Their first C rank is not a straightforward escort and protection job and is not even a C rank. A part of Naruto wants to pause, shrink back, and freeze when the demon brothers locate them, kill Kakashi, and then come for the genin. But the rest of him has dreamed of mission after mission because Arashi became a genin at 9 and a Chunin at 12, and had been, which has been ongoing for years. Thus, the will to advance is driven by instinct as well as anything else, because a cage is hidden beneath the commonplace and ordinary ideas, sleeping there. When the cage awakens, he sees the Kiri Hirai ate and burns. It's mixed up regret, guilt, rage, and terror, and it's resentment that only makes sense in Naruto's own context, because he recalls being Uzuki and seeing Kiri ships at the outside of the city, where a traitor in their midst brought down the barrier just when it was needed most. Recalls Kiri Shinobi murdering both ninjas and civilians in the villages, and he whirls around the brothers' shackles and clawed gauntlets while channeling his wrath and pulling out his strongest weapon, the Sendan. When the smoke clears, Naruto and Sasuke are the only ones left standing. Sasuke is flanking him and acting as though they have practiced this, but they haven't. Instead, Naruto kills the man on the left and Sasuke kills the one on the right. Sasuke nods as he looks at him with his dark, impenetrable gaze when it is all over. Just once, but it's a bigger acknowledgement from him than Naruto has ever received. The gesture is astonishing, and because all Naruto has ever desired, more than anything, is for that person to look at him with respect and acknowledge him. He smiles back at him with a broad, cheery grin as they continue on the journey. A punch intended for Sasuke is blocked by him. As Kagami's ship leaves the docks in Uzushio, Naruto watches as he stares at him and watches Sasuke begin to fall. He waves once and watches Kagami lean over the railing to wave back before one of the big jounin traveling with him grabs him by the scruff and drags him back to safety. Once the spacecraft had disappeared from view, Naruto continued to laugh and wave, but he never saw Kagami again. Sasuke is the same as Kagami, who was brutally and ambushed to death on the way back to Konoha. Since Mizuki, Naruto hasn't tried to ignore the voice in his brain. It feels like a part of him, like himself, and he has listened and accepted it. But at this moment, however, just now, the guy he used to be is rising with his sorrow and rage, suppressing even the glimmerings of crimson rage that attempt to escape. And Naruto simply doesn't fight, he shuts his eyes. He doesn't even attempt to reject what his body does in movements. Instead, he lets a lifetime of instinct take over. The godly wind from the mountains is Futon. Naruto bares his teeth as he senses the ice mirrors surrounding them straining as the wind picks up. He lifts his hands once again as the vortex starts to develop. Water trumpet, Suton. Under the combined jutsus and the overwhelming force of chakra, the mirrors shatter and explode outward. The second shinobi, Haku, Zabuza called him, but Naruto doesn't want his foes to be human. He doesn't want the person who killed Sasuke to have a name, an identity, or a backstory, is thrown backwards as they shatter and crumble. With all the speed he can muster, Naruto leaps forward, turning into a blur of blue, gray, and gold as he strikes out and splits the hated mask in half with a single hit. I detest you, he thinks, feeling enraged, heartbroken, and hurt. I detest you. Another one of my priceless people was taken from me by you. Then that boy from the jungle appears, his eyes as vacant and desolate, and Naruto. At the last second, Naruto reverses the direction of the senbon in his hand and strikes with his knuckles rather than the needle, knocking Haku to the ground. He cries out, his voice breaking, "Why? You are a product of that era." But Haku also informs him, in the end, are they not the same? Both Jinchuriki and the bloodline's offspring were despised, feared, and avoided. To avoid being seen, Naruto sets his teeth, brings one set of memories to the front, and rushes ahead too quickly to hear when Haku whispers, "Kill me." When he clutches Haku's arm, black marks rush out from under his fingers and curl into a sinister seal as Haku's eyes fly closed. Immediately after collapsing, Naruto twists to a position where he can feel Zabuza's chakra. The body falls to the bridge, one soul lighter since it no longer has the weight of life to support it. Voices can be heard speaking out of the mist, followed by the chirping of 1,000 birds. He turns away and shuts his eyes. "I'm sorry," he thinks, as Haku will awaken to an empty world as a result of his inability to act quickly enough to prevent Zabuza's passing. "I sincerely apologize for your loss." When Haku hears, he sobs, distraught and shattered to his very core, and the other lad leans into Naruto as he kneels down next to him. He allows Naruto to embrace him in a way that he has never been held before by wrapping his arms over his shoulders. And it's a shinobi. They are devices. However, they are also capable of feeling sadness, fear, and hope, and that is all they will ever be capable of unless they cut out their own hearts. Even if they are undesired and disliked, they are still breathing, which is not nice, fine, or even near to it. And maybe, just maybe, they can rely on one another until they figure out how to face this harsh world alone. If they ever do, I wish you would blame me because it would be simpler. But as nothing is ever simple, Haku simply grins back dejectedly as they continue their walk. Given everything that is expressed in his dark eyes, Sasuke walks in front of them without saying anything. But Naruto believes that he might as well be walking alongside them. It's just them after all of the justifications, paperwork, medical examinations, and recoveries. Living together in a little apartment that is too big for one but just suitable for two are Naruto, Haku, and Naruto. It's family dinners and quiet tears, nightmares made more bearable by hearing someone else breathe, goodbyes and hellos, and being able to say "I'm home" and have someone respond. They don't discuss about those dreams, which are really recollections of Haku's dream about Zabuza dying, and Naruto's dream about Uzushio falling. But that's okay. While Naruto is still a genin and Haku is learning to become a medic nin, Kakashi is pushing both of them forward because of the impending Chunin exams in his sluggish, cunning manner. Although they are both a little lost, they are no longer alone, And that's better. When there aren't enough of those to go around, it's a comfort. Every night at night, Naruto sees in his nightmares fragments and broken shards of another existence, swirling through his thoughts too quickly for him to follow. Yet he does so nonetheless because Arashi is him, and any distinctions he once thought existed between them are now beginning to blur. If they ever were. He imagines himself as a genin, then a chunin, and finally a jounin. A young man who everyone labels a genius but who laughs and grins like anybody else. Who commits himself to his town without fail or doubt. Dreams of advancing and rushing and pushing himself forward. With a full city at his back. Their blue and white office uniforms shone in the springtime sun. And Naruto recalled an elderly man with long white hair kneeling before him and gently placing an elaborate hat on his head. Sandam Yuzuka Uzumaki Arashi recalls the first time he signed his name with the new title. When he wakes up and starts to go around the streets, people begin to whisper that he is unsuitable to be a shinobi, and is not fit to live among them as a human. Somehow, the pain is worse today than it was when he was unaware of the cause. How can they have observed him, seen him as a youngster, and yet still name him a demon? He has spent 12 years in this hamlet, growing, running, and laughing like any other lad. Haku does not fully comprehend, but enough. He is neither blind nor deaf. He observes the glares, the whispers, and how few people noticed him at all outside Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi. Because he is kind, he never asks, but every time they are out in public, Naruto observes the way he advances and walks between Naruto and the busier parts of the street. Naruto thinks of Uzumaki Yui, whose red hair is tied in a high tail, and her vigorous defense whenever someone knocks Arashi down. As he looks at him and smiles, as Uzukage, she had merely served as his assistant, but she soon won his friendship. He smiles at his new acquaintance, who is attractive enough to pass for a lady, and who has a tiger's heart beneath his placid exterior, and thinks that Haku would have enjoyed her. He offers, crossing his arms behind his head and taking in the late afternoon sunshine. We should see if Iruka up senseis for ramen. Haku almost rolls his eyes but doesn't quite do so. He responds, how about we just make something for ourselves? Your teacher's wallet will thank us, I'm sure of it. The boy receives Naruto's best pout. But Haku, ramen is fantastic. Naruto-kun. Naruto has learned that while appearing calm and composed with barely a hint of exasperation, that look only portends problems for him. He sighs, raises his hands, then yields to being stabbed by the senbon in various exposed areas. Okay, but can we have yakitori now? Haku simply grins at him without giving him a head pat, as if he were a well-behaved puppy or something. We can have yakitori, Naruto-kun, but you'll have to help me prepare it, okay? Haku, stop speaking to me like I'm 5. I wouldn't, Naruto-kun. Surely it's all in your head. Haku, so Naruto and Haku and Haku and Naruto and Haku. And then the Chunin exams happen, and there's Gaara too. Staring across the stadium with dead eyes that can't quite hide the loneliness and agony he's pouring out. The murmuring voice is enough for Naruto to realize that this is another lost soul, just like him. Within a month of one another, he has already met 2. And occasionally, as he sits across from Haku at dinner, Naruto wonders how many more there are. How many more kids are there who are abandoned and unwanted, scorned by all around them, and who rely solely on willpower and sheer will to survive? Undoubtedly, there are too many, but there are also too few. Even though the Sandaime perishes, another priceless life wasted, one more and never again. Not ever, and Sasuke is marked by the snake bastard. Konoha prevails in the brief conflict, and Naruto is taken away to search for Tsunade. All he can picture is a young girl, clinging to her granduncle's hand during Uzushio's first Chunin exams hosting. The young girl has big eyes and a stubborn slant to her mouth, a fiery temper and a gentle touch. He learns the basics of Rasengan from Jiraiya, and at night, when the Toad Sage is dozing off or away on his own, Naruto sits up in bed and thinks about Haku. Naruto likes to believe that he is independent, self-reliant, and able to stand on his own. So it is surprising and disconcerting how quickly he has become accustomed to this, to not being alone. This doesn't exactly make him weak, but maybe it's the next best thing. Every time in Uzushio Shinobi fell, he recalls Arashi's sadness, remembers and laments because having precious people has its costs, fear, dread, and an open, obvious gaping hole that signals to adversaries where to strike. It doesn't really matter, not at all, as Naruto won't lose any more of his priceless companions, not the way he did in Uzushio, where there was blood, flames, fighting, and a reddened sea at the break of day. It's not like the Sandaime was lost. Never again, please. In a few days, he learns Rasengan, and when he looks at his hand for the first time after finishing it successfully, he is filled with excitement. Although difficult and painful, there is a lot of potential. Everyone agrees that the Yondaime Hokage was brilliant, and Naruto is aware of this. But this, he grinned and stretched his fingers before slipping under Jiraiya's less than vigilant watch to look for a quiet clearing to practice in. Who called? Uzumaki Arashi, the storm god, is responsible for the wind and water. Wind always comes more easily, and Naruto summons it in its purest, most unadulterated form and adds it to that spinning sphere of chakra merely because he can and because, as Naruto and Arashi, he has been pushing himself since he first acknowledged his dreams as a type of reality. Because he is the same youngster who, when he was 12 years old, combined wind and water to create a Bunshin to experiment with its effects. And this is no different. Although the ensuing jutsu doesn't completely overwhelm him, everyone else is fair game. Racing it in one hand, the tight spiral absorbing wind chakra, and Sutin, destruction torrent in the other. He has used this type of attack before, against Haku's ice mirrors, but this is 100 times more potent than a redirected tornado and a jet of water. One of the Sannin should be stopped in his tracks by this, and if not, Naruto will keep practicing and eventually knock him out. Sasuke is then taken back to Konoha, where Tsunade heals him, the only lady Naruto has ever looked at and the only one from whom he has ever truly desired a pleasant word or delicate gesture entirely ignores him at that point. Even though Naruto was the one who rescued her from Gaara's sand and was the one who persuaded Tsunade to go back to the village and treat Sasuke, she throws her arms around his neck as he sits up, clings and sobs and never looks over. She never once turns to face him, and neither does Sasuke. As close to an acceptance of Sakura's emotions as Naruto has ever seen from him. He places a hand on her shoulder while keeping his eyes fixed on the wall. For a while, Naruto stares at them as he feels his smile wane. He holds it up to his face before ducking out of the room and going off by himself. They also fail to notice him leave. That night, he has a deathly and lonely dream in which he is surrounded by the Mizuki and 4 of his best shinobi, and is backed up against a wall of the structure that once housed Uzushio's administrative center. Dreams of a pale-faced red-headed youngster with a gloomy expression staring at him with regret in his eyes and a twisted mouth. Reluctantly, Naruto responds, Risey, feeling his stomach twist and spin. He knows this Chunin has seen him with his Aunt Yui and has thought of him as a nice, intelligent child who is quiet and reserved. Why, Risey? Uzumaki Risey, however, is unable to respond, and Naruto is pressed for time as the Mizuki draws near. He battles. Of course he battles, but the Mizuki is rested and supported by his Jounin, whereas Naruto has been fighting continuously for almost 3 days and is alone himself. Fighting is taking place in the streets and on the docks, meticulously planned attacks against the administrative, command, communication, and medical facilities of the town, with no chance of any Uzushio shinobi stepping in to save their cage. There is no hope of escape for Naruto because he can already feel his Uzumaki reserves depleting. Finally, he passes away. Uzushio's golden stones appear to rise up and grab him as he falls with his throat slashed from behind and blood gushing hot and wet against his flesh. They then gently cradle his body as he lands. Even with all the pains, it's still a harsh blow, though not as harsh as it may have been. Not at all. Despite being completely out of breath and seriously bleeding, the Mizuki huffs out a mocking laugh. He kicks Naruto's glaive with a petty kind of viciousness, and it clatters away and lands well out of reach. The man declares, "Our win," and Naruto's world goes black. But not completely. He would believe it to be a dream if he weren't already dreaming. Maybe a delusion of some kind. However, there is a tremendous type of sorrow all around him. Something timeless and unreachable that has been carved into the very stones of Uzushio. Just like the seals that were used to construct her, because the Shade Mizuki and the other founders extracted the Uzushio stone from the sea, from the Earth's primordial state, applied their seals, and built the entire city in just 1 month. And the seals are still there, hanging around in the streets, buildings, and homes, in the market district's fountains, and on the wave-lapping piers, visible from one end of Uzushio to the other. They are usually inactive. Typically, they are silent and all but forgotten as they slumber. But the sequence of extraordinarily sophisticated seals buried deep beneath the city that hold Uzushio together have been infused with the blood of every significant shinobi family. The blood that has been flowing through the streets and gathering in the gutters for the past 3 days as Uzushio shinobi have died is known to the city and is recognized. Blood has strength. For the past 3 generations, the seals that comprise chakra have linked Uzushio to both of her strength and soul-born power, both of which have been extensively spilled throughout this invasion. It suffices. There is a spark, a flicker, and there are breaths, heartbeats, and knowings all around Naruto. Child, that enormous voice whispers in his ear, broken with sorrow. She tells him to go to bed as the darkness descends like a cresting wave. Currently, sleep. The people have fled the ruined city, but your soul remains. Child, one day I'll call you again and you'll come. For a few period, Naruto forgets about the battle, grief, and death at his heels because to the tranquility and simplicity of her touch. He closes his eyes while being held by golden stones that have been warmed by the sun and remembers happier times with Kagami, Sihara-sensei, and his teammates Haru and Fuyu. He also remembers red rooftops, white stone, and golden brown streets under the sun, as well as storms that were enormous in size and rose above the sea. Amidst the sorrow, there were people, places, and things that were once seen but are now eternally cherished. He makes the pledge that I will even as he completely vanishes. Next time I'll talk to you, I swear. Naruto opens his eyes in bed that night and sits up when the wind begins to whisper through the treetops and the moon flies between ragged clouds and shines its waxing light across the sleeping hamlet. The atmosphere is quaking, shaking, and singing. His blood has the sensation of fire, moonlight, and starlight coursing through it. He is tight, shaking, and ready to flee, but to rather than away from, since the voice on the wind is different from any he has ever heard before. Me, he suddenly realizes with some astonishment. Oh, I guess I was always responsible. Arashi here, Arashi is me. But there's something more profound, vaster, and overwhelming that breaks over him with a thunderless boom as it crests the horizon like a wave. It is a voice, yet the word isn't quite big enough to describe what it is. Much as how the sun is a star. It cries out, "Come home," and even that is enough to get Naruto to sob and cover his ears. Please, my young one, I've been waiting so long. Naruto also recalls. He recalls how the city seemed to sing beneath his feet, how it buzzed and whirred and communicated to him without saying a word. It talked to him when he was a kid, a man, and then more than ever as Uzuki. To him, she spoke. Uzushio. He's being called home by Uzushio. Haku is sitting upright on his futon across the little room and asks, Naruto-kun. He is drowsy but suspicious. Do you feel okay? When Naruto looks at him, he sees a boy with no family, no roots, and only the future he may create for himself through hard work and sacrifice. Oh, but we're the same, aren't we in the end? He thinks as he turns to face him. Without even attempting to get out of his pajamas, he gets out from under the sheets, looks aside, and says gently, "Sorry, Haku. I'll be back in a minute. Don't wait up for me." Iruka wakes to a knock on his window and a face outside the glass with a mop of windswept blonde hair and large, almost desperate eyes. Of all the things that hold him in Konoha, only one connection is forged to be unbreakable. And right now he needs that. Being Naruto, he slides out of bed as expected and opens the window, allowing the boy to enter the room by eluding him. His attempt to suppress a yawn as he asks, Naruto, is a genuine surprise. He hadn't believed Naruto was even aware of his residence. Is there a problem? In order to avoid gazing at Iruka, Naruto hesitates and wavers while scanning the room. Iruka frowns at Naruto's brazenness and determination to act without second thought, even when doing so would be preferable. He says it again, then reclines on the bed, patting the mattress next to him to extend the invitation. What's happening? Naruto takes the offered seat and inhales deeply, appearing to harden himself. He then twists his fingers in his lap. He says hesitantly, Iruka-sensei, which is unsettling. You are aware that you are one of my most beloved persons, right? Iruka remembers that night in the jungle with Mizuki on the ground and Naruto towering over him yelling, "Don't touch Iruka-sensei." As she looks at him, "I'll kill you." He grinned and reached out to bury his fingers in his long, golden hair, which softly ruffled because he had once been Naruto. He was once a young lad just like this one, and he is fully aware of what it means to find a true love. He nods to his favorite pupil and says, "I thought so. I'm honored, but it's still great to hear it. Thank you, Naruto." When Naruto smiles back, his customary brilliance lights up beneath the smile before concern dims it once more. "You're not going to cease being my precious person if I don't see you for a long, right?" he asks after swallowing. The Uzumaki kid being taken as an apprentice by the Toad Sage Jiraiya has been the subject of rumors throughout the hamlet. Iruka feels the pressure around his heart loosen as he realizes what this is all about. Being a lonely boy, Naruto clings to the family he has created for himself and doesn't want to let go of it. Naturally, he would be concerned as he considered leaving the community for an extended period of time. With all the love he has for him, clumsiness, occasional genius, and long-forgotten love of orange included, he puts an arm around Naruto's shoulders and draws the young man to his side. He whispers, "Never, Naruto," into that mass of hair. Physical separation is never preferable to emotional proximity when people's hearts are connected. If you have to go, I'll still be waiting for you when you get back, no matter how long it takes. Naruto's body quickly releases all the stress Iruka hadn't seen, and he quickly turns to hug Iruka back with his strongest ever arms. "Iruka-sensei, I want them to acknowledge me. I want that even more than I want to become Hokage, but it's..." Naruto shakes his head, as if shaking off negative thoughts, and then looks up to meet Iruka's eyes. I love Konoha," he says in a hurry, like it's a confession, which it kind of is. Iruka can't recall ever seeing anything like that inside the sky blue, and it almost terrifies him, because even if Iruka is unable to exactly describe it, Naruto shouldn't have that expression or look that way. Iruka carefully says, "You should, Naruto, because even if the villagers acknowledge you, if you're not happy, it won't be enough. And more than anything, I want you to be strong and safe and happy, no matter what path you choose in the end." It seems as though the entire world is depending on his words. Naruto turns his head away and looks east through the window. Even though there isn't even a glimmer of morning or the sun yet, he smiles as something that like a light streaks across his face. Deems grinned and turned to face Iruka with what appears to be excitement in his eyes. It's nice. Naruto is intended to look like that. Not somber and dejected, but resolute, joyful. He hugs Iruka's chest and exclaims, "Thanks, Iruka-sensei," before getting up from the bed and leaping onto the window ledge. He briefly stops there, keeping his gaze fixed on the horizon, and then turns to face his direction. He gives one more smile before disappearing into the night without a trace. After that, Iruka spends a considerable amount of time thinking about the dialogue. It nearly sounded like, but no. Iruka laughs as he shakes his head in disbelief, berating himself for having an overactive imagination. After dimming the light, he pulls the covers up to his chin, sighs softly, and then slips back under the sheets. He then closes his eyes. Morning will arrive soon enough, and when it does, he will find Naruto and ask him for a full explanation. Later, after all, they still have time. With an ease that most genin lack, Haku observes Naruto enter the room through the open window, and then stand in the middle of the space for a while to look about at the items that have accumulated over the years. After spending so many years on the road with Zabuza, Haku is familiar with the expression, "What do you have that I value? What must I take with me? And how little of everything can I live without?" Haku is aware that there aren't any operations underway and no journeys like the one to find the god aim planned, so this comes as a bit of a surprise. And Naruto has always consistently, given the sense that he is wholly committed to this community tucked away in the undergrowth, to this location where his team resides and develops. He glances across at his pal and softly says, "Naruto-kun." He puts his scroll down and folds his hands in his lap. Actually, his first pal. First and foremost, he will never truly become one of the Konoha residents because, despite how readily they embrace those with lineage, he is still a stranger and an outsider. Haku pauses at the look in Naruto's brief, slightly preoccupied gaze in his direction. Recognizable but not. They are Naruto's eyes, although they seem focused in some way. Distilled, fully developed, the figure standing behind them is more Naruto than he has ever seen. And the expression on their faces is, Haku considers it to be mighty, as there is no other word that could possibly give that expression justice. That will be enough to persuade him. He gets up from his futon with a groggy huff, grabs the small, worn-out pack Zabuza first gave him, and begins folding his meager belongings. Naruto says, "Haku," with a tone that veers vaguely between confusion and humored resignation. Haku looks up briefly to give his pal a fleeting smile, and then returns to checking his senbon, confident that he has already won the argument that is about to break out. He says, "You keep staring east." Zabuza always claimed that his restlessness was caused by missing Kiri, and the fact that nowhere else felt like home. And you seem restless, much like Zabuza did when he'd been in one location too long. "Naruto, where is your house?" He says nothing. Naruto pauses for a while before he begins to remove sealing scrolls and his own bundle of them. He says, "You could be a medic nin if you stayed. but he doesn't sound optimistic that his point will hold water. Haku effortlessly parries, and you have a crew here. Wishing you the best, a team, a sensei, and the Godame Hokage said, while still keeping his gaze fixed out the window toward where the sun will rise in a few hours. Naruto stops in his packing. He assures them that Sasuke team and Sakura-chan will be alright, and Haku can sense the loneliness in his voice. Parents grin and kids laugh as they see a young boy playing alone in the snow, and another boy alone on a swing. He falters, shakes his head, and begins again. They're both going to be wonderful shinobi. And they'll do well. They make me happy, and they're valuable to me, but I'll always love them. But Konoha isn't the place that will make me happiest. That place ... it needs me. Haku, more than Konoha does, and I need it, too, said Haku. Sakura and Sasuke and Kakashi-sensei and Iruka-sensei will survive without me. I'll always love them. Haku gives himself a small smile and nods before securing the flap of his pack and sealing his pack. He asserts, Konoha isn't the only place to become a medic nin, and I'm not about to let you wander off by yourself, Naruto-kun. After considering whether or not to continue the argument for a while, Naruto finally gives in and sighs after Haku maintains a steady gaze on him. He takes a breath, runs a hand through his hair, and then looks up with a charming smile on his face. You know we're going to have to sneak away, right? Okay, thank you, Haku. At that, Haku flinches. In spite of slipping away in the middle of the night, Naruto has never quite come across as the stealthy kind. You don't think if you ask they'll let you leave. Indecisive for a split second, Naruto's mouth twists, and when his eyes meet Haku's, he appears uneasy. He quickly says, I know they won't, because I'm a Jinchuriki. Every significant village is expected to have one, to maintain the balance of power. And no matter how much they detest me, they're not going to want to let me leave. The puzzle pieces fit together perfectly in a flash. Haku blinks quickly as he sorts through the situation and recalls a memory of a gloomy, red-headed boy. Gaara-san too, he inquires. After giving his face some thought, Naruto lets his shoulders drop and his body's rigid line loosen a little before nodding. Yes, Gaara possesses the Ikibai, but I possess the Kyuubi. But mine prevents the demon from entering my head unless I actively seek it out, whilst his does not. This explains why he appears to be a little mad. The ocean is a little moist if Gaara is a little insane. Haku resists the impulse to mutter it tightly behind his teeth and instead nods since his mother taught him to at least have a modicum of tact. Before getting up and following the blonde, he observes Naruto seal the final scroll in a sealing scroll and store it away. He mutters, may I inquire where we're going? As Naruto gives his surroundings one last glance. After pausing, Naruto turns to face him, the vivid blue of his eyes resembling the ocean at the bottom of a July sun. There is simply no place for doubt or the acceptance of defeat in his heart, as seen by the line that runs beyond stubborn and determined that comes from his tongue. Uzushio, he replies. We are traveling to Uzushio. They are among the final Suna shinobi to leave Konoha following their unconditional surrender, and they have 3 days left. Gaara is aware that his siblings are anxious to get home and are walking like they're on pins, afraid of every Konoha shinobi they come across. But not at all. He may not feel any connection to Sonogakure because he has no special memories or connections to the city. Despite the fact that Konoha has a temperate climate and huge expanses of greenery, it still has a weird fascination for the man who was born in the sand. Maybe it's because Gaara has made his first buddy in Konoha, not in the dry, unforgiving Suna. And regardless of what role Gaara played in the invasion and the ensuing catastrophe, Naruto is still a friend or remains so. Regardless of whether the Ikibai is speaking to him or not, regardless of how much blood he has shed to support his own existence. That's so close to becoming astounding. Gaara sits on the wide sill and leans back against the window frame as he watches the village at night. He shuts his eyes and recalls a surge of water and wind that seemed like a hurricane brought to earth, as well as a hand reaching out to him despite the fact that he had done nothing to deserve it. Both thinks and recalls, because he desires to have that kind of faith, to remain unwavering in the face of fear, and to be able to hold someone dear to his heart. He craves it despite the fact that he has never really received it. Not from Yashimaru and not from Temari, who makes an effort to be kind but still flinches every time he sees her in any way that wasn't a lie. Not from the constantly cautious Kankuro, not even from Naruto, a total stranger who has every right to despise him. Gaara does not want to leave, not even if it means remaining in this hostile environment as an intruder. That's not particularly novel, though. However, it's not Konoha who is keeping him here. It's a boy with a heart that is too big for him, A boy with beautiful blue eyes and a grin. And a boy with a storm sleeping inside of him. A boy who is both exactly like him and yet not even remotely comparable. Actually, a boy who is currently sneaking over the roofs. When Gaara detects a recognizable figure sliding through the shadows, he blinks, leans forward, and closes his eyes. The person is sneaky enough that no one else will probably notice him. Within a moment, he turns around to see someone else, that other acquaintance, the one who had hurriedly examined Naruto upon his arrival with the other medic Nin. Both of them are moving covertly and quietly while toting packs. Something twinges Gaara simply once as she glances down at them, who are obviously headed somewhere else. There is no logic or sense to it. He doesn't even turn to face his sister and brother who are dozing out across the room. Despite the absence of the ANBU who typically keep an eye on them, just summons his sand and lets it take him out of the window, and onto the street as Naruto and his partner fall to the ground. He crosses his arms over his chest and says, "Uzumaki," even though he has no intention or purpose to strike up a discussion. The other genin turns his attention to him with blue eyes that flutter slightly in surprise, and he then smiles a little bit. He responds, "Hey, Gaara," and motions toward the other boy who is just starting to emerge from the shadows. His whisper of chakra against Gaara's skin is chilly and alien, but not unpleasant. He is attractive, cool, and strong. "Gaara, my friend Haku, this is Sabaku no Gaara." Haku tilts his head slightly and smiles politely, but his body is completely focused on Naruto, waiting for any cue. "Gaara-san, it's a joy to meet you." Gaara nods while keeping Naruto in view. Even though morning is still a few hours away, the second Jinchuriki keeps looking away and turning to the east. He frowns slightly as he studies the blonde with his pack and the ceiling scrolls protruding from his belt bag. Suddenly, it all becomes clear to him. He says, "You're leaving," and it almost sounds accusatory. After pausing and giving him a long look, Naruto sighs and runs a hand through his hair. He says, "A little weary, a little sad, I am. Konoha is nice, but right now I have to go somewhere else. Somewhere that feels like home." Gaara repeats, tasting the word as though it were unfamiliar to him. Mostly, yes, home is something other people have, almost a myth, and completely foreign. He takes a moment to observe Naruto, noticing the whisker markings on his face and the rumble of excessive chakra reserves in the air. And then he pauses and thinks, because Naruto is also a Jinchuriki, finding a home for him means. He asks plainly, "They don't care that you're a monster." To his astonishment, Naruto laughs at that. He casts another peek east before directly addressing Gaara. He responds, "No," with a cunning fox grin that is barely audible. "It was once a house, though, and I'm going to restore it. One stone at a time, if I have to. That would be hard, given there isn't much left beyond rubble right now, at least on the surface." His eyes, caught in a blaze of blue that is so full of tenacity, and unwavering belief that it is nearly overwhelming, are enough to destroy anyone. Gaara believes. Gaara doesn't know how many pieces this house may be in, but he is certain that if necessary, Naruto will pick it back up from the dust. He is certain of this to the depths of his being. The two of them are exactly the same while also being completely different from one another. However, if Naruto is constructing a home for himself and his friend, who has the same lifeless, lost eyes Gaara is so well acquainted with, Gaara could undoubtedly live in that house as well. Gaara's pack is carried by a stream of sand that retreats to the hotel window, enters, and then re-emerges a short while later. He stoically turns to face Naruto as he accepts it and shoulders it. To his credit, Naruto chooses not to engage in a debate. Under the weight of those blue eyes, he watches Gaara for what feels like an eternity before asking softly, "Your brother and sister?" Gaara doesn't often show emotion, but that inquiry causes his lips to twitch and causes him to look away as he remembers Temari's terror and Kenkuro's horror and wariness that was only just concealed by his bravado. Maybe, just maybe, he could count them as his family if he worked hard enough. Maybe one day, but not anytime soon. Standing here, he must decide between going with the one who is openly concerned for him right now and going back to those who won't be for years, if ever. Well, even for someone like Gaara, the decision is straightforward. Instead of responding, he simply answers, "East, albeit perhaps that suffices. We're traveling east." Haku briefly appears to object, but his dark eyes grow thoughtful, and he turns his head to face the blonde boy who is younger than both of them but is unquestionably their leader. After evenly catching Haku's attention, Naruto smiles and nods to Gaara. He turns away and cheerfully replies, "Yeah." He then adjusts his own bag. "We'll cut straight across to Hot Springs country and over to the ocean. There's a small fishing community there. And it's only a short boat ride to an island off the coast. From the island, it's not even half a day's journey to Whirlpool Country. We should be able to get passage pretty easily, since Whirlpool isn't entirely isolated. And if we can't, I remember how to get through the reefs well enough. Even though I would, with a somewhat melancholy half-smile twisting his lips, Naruto says that last bit as if it were an inside joke, more wistful than depressed, though it undoubtedly contains regrets. Gaara stares at Haku, realizes that he is just as ignorant as Gaara is, and decides to give in to his curiosity by following the blonde. I don't believe I have ever heard of Whirlpool Country. He gives him another crooked smile for that, but Naruto keeps his gaze fixed on the wall, and the horizon in front of them. Yes, he murmurs, sounding wry, dejected, and just a little bit bitter. The majority haven't. He remembers Mito from the last time he saw her, during one of her infrequent visits to Uzushio, when they sneak out of Konoha, right over the wall and into the forest without anybody seeing. She is every bit the wife of the very first Kage. And Naruto as Arashi can read the weight of the burden she carries in the set of her shoulders and the lines in her face that speak of some vast inner war. She is tall, especially for a woman, regal and imposing, and very, very beautiful. Even in her age, it is a terrible thing to choose to become a sacrifice, to know everything that you are giving up and to surrender it regardless out of duty and honor. But Senju Mito, who was once Uzumaki Mito, is the one to whom Naruto bows, bowing low and deep with all the respect he feels for her. Naruto has just returned from his appointment. The Uzukage had a new weight on his head, and blue and white robes heavy with ceremony. Uzushio is honored by your presence, Naruto whispers to Mito-sama, the stately and inspiring woman he has admired since he was a young boy. It is not every day that Uzushio picks a new Kage, she continues, her tone light and friendly. It is not every day that Uzushio chooses a new Kage, she says, stepping back and softening her expression. A hand lands on Naruto's shoulder, prodding him upright. Mito pauses as she studies him, her smile never wavering. Sandem Uzukage, another Uzumaki, though that is to be expected. And you are our youngest yet, Arashi-kun, are you not? I remember you as a genin, following along behind Sihara-san like a little duckling, so eager to learn anything she would teach you. And now, to see what you have become, she would be proud of you, Arashi-kun. Naruto can only watch her go in amazement and disbelief as she sweeps away into the crowd with her retainers tumbling in behind her. Uzumaki Mito is a legendary Fuinjutsu expert, and the Jinchuriki of one of the most potent Biju. Senju Hashirama's wife, Uzumaki Mito, is one of the main proponents of world peace. He recently heard from Mito that he would make a fine Kage. He is shocked, apprehensive, and elated while also being incredibly happy. He also believed that the day was already spectacular. He ghosts his fingers over the spiral emblem stitched onto the sash of his robe, tracing the mark of his town like it's an oath, saying, I swear, even if it takes everything I have, I will make Uzushio a name that everyone will know, long after she's fully vanished.
I will continue the series in the next part, so stay tuned. Till then, we weeb offline.